For generations, Doctor Who has entertained and petrified us.
I was thinking, wow, a lot of people are being killed on this.
I was terrified.
But behind the scenes, it was a story of near-fatal danger.
All this water and broken glass just crashed out into the studio.
And this is a chemical, and I was choking.
Secret lives.
Oh, the two families.
And abuse of power.
He would ask a fan, you know, would you like to come up to my room?
We'll reveal inappropriate outfits.
I remember thinking it was quite fun. I remember Colin being quite disturbed by it all.
Missing episodes.
I believe they still exist somewhere in the world.
And the truth about the Doctor's biggest enemy.
Doctor Who was reviled at the BBC, and I'm not exaggerating. People just hated it, and they wanted to kill it.
So get yourself behind the sofa as we reveal the shocking secrets and scandals of Britain's favourite sci-fi show. It's November 1976. Punk is breaking into mainstream culture. Britain's economy is in tatters. Tom Baker is playing the Doctor in popular children's programme Doctor Who. And at 6:05 on a Saturday afternoon, the nation's children are about to be traumatised by a Doctor Who episode that was so shocking the BBC itself was forced to censor it. In The Deadly Assassin, Tom Baker's Doctor is framed for murdering the president of the Time Lords.
I'm in trouble now.
There is this sequence as a cliffhanger to one of the episodes where he is fighting and he is held underwater.
Finished, Doctor. You're finished.
The Doctor was being drowned underneath water, and then they just cut to the credits, and as a child, that stayed with you, and you couldn't sort of get that out of your head, and you were left with that for a whole week until the next episode came along. It was very scary.
And they hold on the shot of him being held underwater for quite a long time. And Mary Whitehouse actually flagged this up.
Everyone's favourite moral crusader, Mary Whitehouse, had long been calling on the BBC to finance research into the effect of Doctor Who on young children. And once again, her typewriter was running red hot.
It's one thing that we forget today is watching it on DVD, on Blu-ray. We think, oh, you know, yeah, we'll just stick the next episode on. People had to wait a week then.
In an interview 17 years later, Mary was still livid.
I can see it still in my mind's eye. Doctor Who drowning, the final shots of the programme, with the image that was left in the mind of the child for a whole week.
Even the BBC acknowledged the scene may have gone too far, with an internal memo saying, Mrs. Whitehouse continues to pepper me, but at first sight it would seem she has a point.
They actually edited the master tape. So when it was eventually repeated on the BBC, they cut a lot of that out. And it ends quite abruptly, and you don't even see him under the water.
Children had been hiding behind the sofa to watch Doctor Who since it began in 1963. And it turns out they had good reason.
The first Doctor Who I ever remember watching was called Terror of the Autons. And terror was the right word for the title. I mean, it really did freak me out.
Terror of the Autons contained a doll which came to life and strangled people, a daffodil which spat plastic film over people's mouths to suffocate them, and a plastic chair which swallowed whoever sat in it. Most terrifying of all were the Autons themselves, who even drew complaints from the actual police. I can't think why.
So there's one episode where the Doctor is arrested, and he goes, I'm not sure if this is a genuine policeman.
Excuse me, officer, could I see your warrant card?
The Doctor knocks his face off, and it's the blank Auton underneath. And, of course, the police are going, oh, come on, we're trying to get kids to trust the police, and you've just made police scary aliens.
Unbelievably, Scotland Yard themselves contacted the BBC about the show, as producer Barry Letts recalled in a DVD commentary over these tense and controversial scenes.
I had a letter after this episode went out from Scotland Yard saying, we understand your desire to have sensational television programmes, but we go to a lot of trouble to get the children not to be frightened of the police. Please don't do this sort of thing again.
1974's Planet of the Spiders, about a race of mutated spiders plotting to take over the universe.
I
am the Queen.
Led to claims by a psychiatrist in an academic journal that the story had fueled a wave of arachnophobia in children. Snowflakes.
This is Boris.
Oh, OK, well, yeah, that thing would actually terrify a child.
We'd had a number of these size spiders made, about 30 of them or so. They're a spider, what do you expect? So, Planet of the Spiders, the clue's in the name, you know. So how are we going to make a spider less scary than a spider? I think kids love spiders. Give them a good tarantula.
By the mid-80s, the likes of Cannibal Holocaust were easily accessible for £1.50 from your local video shop. And Doctor Who decided to up the ante.
Resurrection of the Daleks was one of the most violent stories that I did.
I do remember that some of the episodes where the Daleks were part of the storyline getting more and more violent. And some of them were, I was thinking, wow, a lot of people are being killed on this.
In fact, Resurrection of the Daleks in 1984 had a higher body count than The Terminator. Just a reminder, this is a children's programme we're talking about.
It wasn't looking like that little TV series. It was sort of growing. At the time, we were opposite the A-Team, which was full of violence. They had machine guns and were shooting bullets into people all the time.
I think the producers had aspirations that it could become more serious science fiction. And I think that's why the level of violence crept up.
The 1985 series finale, Revelation of the Daleks, even tackled the gritty topic of euthanasia through the medium of the deformed, disembodied head of a still sentient man who's about to be transformed into a Dalek. All at 5:20 in the afternoon.
Kill me, child! I can't! It is our duty to eradicate all those who wish to pollute the purity of the Dalek race. If you ever love me, Natasha, kill me! Kill me!
I think you could say Stengos's head in Revelation of the Daleks is probably one of the goriest things on screen in Doctor Who.
And he's talking to his daughter, and he starts becoming all Dalek-y because the Dalek is taking over. And so he says, please kill me.
This is, euthanasia as a plot line in an episode of Doctor Who. That's a very brave decision to make.
On the other hand, it was immediately followed by Jim'll Fix It and Les Dennis's Laughter Show, so you could argue it set the tone pretty well. Coming up, we reveal how Doctor Who wasn't just scary, it was genuinely dangerous.
Could you slap her? She's gone blue.
And the visual effects and stunts which were literally death-defying.
He realised that I was in trouble, and he went straight over the head and he pulled the whole thing off, ripped it out, and that practically saved my life.
It's 1989 and the world is a dangerous place. A wave of revolutions is sweeping Eastern Europe. Diplomatic relations break down between Britain and Iran. And at Television Centre, the cast and crew of Doctor Who are filming the dramatic cliffhanger to episode 2 of Battlefield.
I'm coming!
I'm in the tank and it's the end of episode moment where the water's all bubbling up and I know it's going to be a cliffhanger with like, Doctor, Doctor!
The incident that followed would become a notorious moment in BBC history.
Somebody hadn't done the mathematics, which is how much stress that amount of water would put on the glass or the plexiglass or whatever it was.
And all of a sudden I can feel this crack under my hands.
This dramatic footage from the studio shows the terrifying accident unseen by viewers as it happened.
Sylvester, my hero, shouted at the top of his voice outside the front of the tank.
Get out! Move back! The water will suddenly... Everybody get back! Move back!
The visual effects guys reached down, pulled me out, and I could see this surreal moment which time kind of stretched, like they say it does, where the front of the tank bulged and all this water and broken glass just crashed out into the studio.
The whole of the studio floor was covered in gallons of water. And I can remember being on my boom with rubber wheels. All of a sudden, there being loads of people clinging onto my boom platform because of the installation of the rubber.
Sylvester's next heroic thing was to realise that electricity and water don't mix that well. So he shouted again at the top of his voice, "Turn off the power!" And somebody turned this big switch in the studio off. He saved my life.
Yes, thanks to Sylvester McCoy's quick thinking, Sophie was saved from drowning and dozens of production crew narrowly avoided potential electrocution. But we can reveal that was far from the only dangerous situation the show's stars found themselves in.
My character starts being on holiday in Lanzarote, so she's in shorts, bikini, all of that. We then went to film the next story in Poole, in Dorset, and that was November. And I'm wearing the same clothes.
Doctor, look!
What?
Glass.
Well, almost anyway. It's fused silica.
I remember the cameraman saying to the production assistant, "Could you slap her? She's gone blue." And so they would slap me to get a bit of colour back in my face to film each sequence. I think we had 5 days of filming. I think we were there from Monday to Friday. I got sent home early. By the time we got to Friday, I had no voice. My lungs were just wheezing.
Once safely back home, Nicola paid a visit to her GP, who prescribed 2 weeks rest and antibiotics for pneumonia. Like a pro, she was back in the studio the following Monday, but something wasn't quite right.
When I took a bath, lumps of my flesh fell off my feet. At which point I went back to my doctor and I went, "What's happening to my feet?" And he went, "You've got frostbite." And so then there's not a lot you can do with that. You just kind of wrap it up. Nowadays, everyone would sue, wouldn't you?
When I joined Doctor Who, I signed a contract that said I would do my own stunts.
Uh-oh, sounds ominous.
We did a story called Enlightenment, and I had to throw myself off a ship into space, and the harness broke on impact. It was a little like jumping onto a brick wall with your legs apart from 20 foot. I could hardly walk for about 2 weeks afterwards.
You might think playing a Cyberman was an easy and safe gig, but you needed balls of steel, like Mark wishes he had.
The helmet would be put down on your head, it would be pressed up against your nose, and then there's a plate at the back to secure it. And this plate was screwed on. And as the screws went in, I was terrified.
For some, it was all just too much.
I do remember one person who really, I suppose, had a panic attack. I don't know if we called it that then. It was frightening to watch him. And he fell on the floor and he was scrabbling about, trying to get his helmet off. Of course, it couldn't be got off unless he was restrained. And the screwdriver was brought out. And eventually the helmet was taken off. Of course, he didn't come back the next day.
One regular Cyberman was stuntman Stuart Fell. You probably recognise him. That's him as Alpha Centauri in The Curse of Peladon. Here he is as the terrifying Wirrin Grubb in The Ark in Space. That reminds me, I do need to buy some bubble wrap. And here he is as a truly grisly-looking Morbius from the brain of Morbius. Stuart played a wide selection of monsters in Doctor Who over the years, but it was playing a Cyberman in this exciting fight from the Five Doctors where Stuart's career nearly came to a very dramatic end.
I'm the one that does all the dying for the Cybermen. I'd already had my arm blown off. They reset the shot and put a simulated smoke with a chemical on it for continuity. And it was very, very windy, and it was blowing this chemical smoke up my arm and into the Cyberman's mask. And this is a chemical, you know. It's not just smoke. And I was choking. We were actually shooting it, and they thought that I was acting a dying Cyberman. I wasn't. I was trying to tell them that the smoke was getting up my arm, and I was choking. The visual effects man, he realised that I was in trouble, and he went straight over to the head, and he pulled the whole thing off, ripped it off, didn't undo the bolts, and that practically saved my life.
Talk about method acting. But at least the actors inside these claustrophobic and often dangerous costumes were all trained professionals. Weren't they?
In the Dominators episodes of Doctor Who, the little foot soldiers, the Quarks, they were operated by children.
What?
Being inside there must have been extremely difficult because you had no arms and these terrible clunky feet. The main difficulty was that if they fell over, they couldn't get up again because they had no arms. So they did fall over quite often because they couldn't see where they were going. Because the box came out to here and their head was in a football anyway, so they couldn't look down and see any obstructions on the way. So good luck to those kids. I hope they survived.
Thank goodness for child labour, eh? But despite the technological advances of the 21st century, playing a monster in Doctor Who is still a pretty unpleasant and uncomfortable experience.
In the Asylum of the Daleks, which was Matt Smith's episode, I was in the Parliament of the Daleks. It was very claustrophobic in those things. You know, it'd been about 10 or 11 hours in there. My elbows were rubbing against the fiberglass. I got burnt. And you've got this periscope, and if you're not careful, if you stop looking far away and you start looking in here, you can get really claustrophobic and have a panic attack. And I think I did. And Matt Smith actually saw me struggling and getting more hot and sweaty, and he got everyone over to come and help me. He said, "Thanks, Matt Smith, saved the day."
But it wasn't the uncomfortable costumes which caused the Daleks to be at the heart of one of Doctor Who's biggest scandals. This is the legendary first appearance of the Daleks. Hang on, where's the Dalek? Oh. That solo sink plunger, which is all you see in this episode because the props were still being built and weren't ready yet, would change Doctor Who forever and make one man a millionaire. Terry Nation was a disgruntled comedy writer who needed some cash after falling out with his main client, Tony Hancock. He wasn't keen on writing for a children's show at all, but having knocked out the script for his first story in a week, his creation, the Daleks, were instantly massive.
Literally children in every playground across the country are mimicking them, are talking about them. It was an overnight sensation.
Although the Daleks are his sworn enemy, it's really the Daleks who saved Doctor Who. It was without the Daleks, we would not have Doctor Who now because they helped make the show the huge hit that it became.
They come back for the Christmas of 1964, and it is a major event. I mean, it is so big that ITV, in response to it, put the Beatles on television at the same time, and Doctor Who gets bigger viewing figures than the Beatles do. For a very brief moment in late 1964, the Daleks are bigger than the Beatles.
The pivotal story gripped audiences with its memorable and menacing imagery of the Daleks invading planet Earth.
Supreme Command have given orders for London to be destroyed by fire bombs.
Dalek mania was gripping the nation.
The BBC was just inundated with manufacturers of everything from toy cigarettes to suits, so you could dress as a Dalek. I think at the peak there was something like 500 different product lines that were all bearing the name of the Daleks. And it was just an enormous merchandising opportunity.
But what nobody at the BBC had paid much attention to was the greatest bit of agenting of all time by Nation's agent, Beryl Virtue.
When the contract comes to Associated London Scripts, the agency that he works for, she sees a clause in it that is to do with the owning of the rights to the script and the spin-offs that might happen, and she simply crosses it out. She crosses out the clause entirely. And so when all the manufacturers and all these toy companies and everybody else comes beating a path to the BBC's door saying, can we have the rights to the Daleks for our products, the BBC realises it probably doesn't actually own the intellectual copyright.
Wait, so the BBC accidentally signed away all future rights to the Daleks by not noticing Beryl Virtue had crossed out a bit of the contract?
So it agrees with Terry Nation. They will split this 50-50. And it is what makes Terry Nation a millionaire. Every single product that is made, he gets half the royalties for it.
But unbelievably, even though he made millions off them, Terry Nation didn't actually come up with the Daleks' iconic design himself.
The person who was given the brief to do the Daleks was Ray Cusack. He took over from another designer that was assigned to do the story with the Daleks, whose name is Ridley Scott, because he was a BBC designer at the time. Whatever happened to him?
Raymond Cusack was a staff member on the BBC payroll, and this script, this brief, came into his office, landed on his desk, and he had to create something special from very little guidance.
Terry Nation, in his script, says, these creatures, non-humanoid, they glide across the floor like a Georgian dancer, which frankly tells you not a lot. And Ray had to interpret this.
He had to think, what can I do to give this a life of its own? And he was the guy that was responsible for the visual look and the attitude and the iconic look of the Daleks that we all know today.
And poor old Ray wasn't allowed to cash in on this moment of inspiration the same way.
Terry Nation was effectively a freelancer, whereas Raymond, he was being paid a staff wage. So it wasn't up to Raymond to get royalties because he'd done his job, thank you very much. Let's move on. Can you do another monster for us, please, Ray? Whereas Terry Nation was laughing.
Throughout Doctor Who's history, Terry Nation, and later his estate, kept a firm grip on how the Daleks were used, as Russell T Davies and team found out when they were preparing to revive the series in the early noughties.
By the time Doctor Who is revived in 2005, Terry Nation is already dead. His estate is represented by Roger Hancock, who is the younger brother of Tony Hancock. And he was prepared to play hardball when it came to negotiating with the BBC for the rights to have the Daleks in the new series, because he was perfectly aware that Doctor Who without the Daleks is like Sherlock Holmes without Dr. Watson. You simply can't do it. And so the newspapers were dominated for months with stories of the Daleks won't be in there. What a terrible shock this is, and this won't be the real Doctor Who.
It was deadlock. And an episode was even briefly titled Absence of the Daleks.
Impossible.
Thankfully, a settlement was reached, allowing this dramatic reveal of the return of the Doctor's most iconic and deadly enemy.
I was so excited about Doctor Who coming back that when they said the Daleks aren't coming, I wasn't that bothered until I realised how much of an absence they would have been, because when they brought back one, very cleverly, they brought back one Dalek to go, you just need the one and it'll kill everybody. That story was so exciting that it made you go, God, can you imagine if that had been anything else? It wouldn't have been the same had it been anything else.
Coming up, things are hotting up as we delve into the steamier side of Doctor Who.
He was half naked to the waist and I was covered in green paint.
And find out how one actress was forced to go to extraordinary lengths to keep the producers happy.
I was pretending to be not only American, but also single.
It's 1992. Madonna publishes a book called Sex. And over on Doctor Who, Colin Baker's Doctor is half naked in a cave with his assistant, Ace. Wait, what?
Let the current ease your pain. Let its purity wash away the shadows.
OK, this isn't Doctor Who.
When the show got cancelled in 1989, clearly the fans wanted it to continue. So they started to make it themselves, and you've got these wonderful fan-made spin-offs.
It was Bill Baggs, and he had a company called BBV, and he was doing fan videos. And so he asked if we'd like to do things like that and audio CDs. And we went, yeah, what the heck? We're going to have a laugh.
Have you never been in love?
No, not really, no. Never really had time for it. I'm a wanderer. Explorer.
A Time Lord? Nah, of course not. But these almost but not quite Doctor Who films featured original cast members, and free from the need to appeal to a family audience, they sometimes veered into raunchier territory.
Douse the flames.
Douse the flames. Very impressed.
I think we were probably relatively irresponsible about what we were doing. Colin Baker and I were filming in a cave in Wookey Hole, and he was half naked to the waist and I was covered in green paint. So, yeah, we didn't really think about the audience.
These fan-made videos were a thriving industry and pretty good value in terms of a quality cast. Here's eco-thriller The Air Zone Solution, starring not just one ex-doctor. There's Peter Davison.
Who is it?
Ooh, Sylvester McCoy as well. OK, Colin Baker, that's 3.
Help doesn't always come from expected places.
No way, they've even got Pertwee in it.
With the other fella.
And, of course, the dutiful Colin Baker gets his kit off again, this time with Nicola Bryant.
I remember thinking it was quite fun. I remember Colin being quite disturbed by it all. And I remember being charged with the job of convincing Colin that this was all going to be all right. I don't know why I ended up with that job. I just did.
In the original series, the steamiest moment was a quick glimpse of John Pertwee in the shower. Who knew the Doctor had a navy tattoo?
There was supposedly this rule from one of the producers, John Nathan Turner, that there wasn't to be any hanky-panky in the TARDIS. And when you do look back at some of the stories now, things are so incredibly platonic. It's slightly unreal.
And the cast felt this was for the best, as John Pertwee himself explained in this cheeky interview from 1995.
The Doctor is not allowed to have any relationships, as you know. I mean, the Doctor is extremely elderly. He's, whatever is he, how many years is he? 240 or something, with 2 hearts? And both of them would probably bang out.
But all that was to change when the show returned for one night only in 1996. Having lost his memory, and up for it, Paul McGann celebrates its return by doing this.
I know who I am! I am the Doctor!
Good!
And not everybody was happy about this unexpected turn of events.
This was a time when Doctor Who didn't kiss anybody, and I was very happy about that, because then it meant when I didn't kiss anybody, I was in good company.
When the 8th Doctor snogged his companion, I thought, yeah, what's wrong with that? You had a young, sexy Doctor, why not? You wouldn't have been wanted to kiss by John Pertwee, would you?
I'm very pleased for all the people who love Doctor Who kissing, but I'm fine. You can have it, fine, if that's how you want to live.
And when the series was revived in 2005, the strict no-sex rule was quickly and enthusiastically scrapped.
Well, of course, in modern Doctor Who, the Doctor kisses everyone. I'm surprised he hasn't kissed a Cyberman, frankly.
Yes, the Doctor gets a lot more action these days. And to prove it, here's Christopher Eccleston kissing Billie Piper, David Tennant kissing Billie Piper, David Tennant kissing Kylie, Matt Smith kissing Alex Kingston, and let's not forget the racy official spin-off Torchwood. But even if the Doctor had to wait 33 years for his first on-screen snog, off-screen, it was a very different story. Lalla Ward joined the show as the Doctor's assistant Romana in 1979. She soon entered a relationship with her co-star Tom Baker, and they were married the following year. Their marriage lasted a brief 16 months, and hints of their tumultuous relationship can be seen on screen. Here they are, loved up in 1979's City of Death.
Let's not be ostentatious.
All right, let's fly then.
That would look silly. We'll take the lift. Come on.
And here they are, looking decidedly frosty in 1980's Warrior's Gate.
You don't know what you're doing.
I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just following intuition.
By this point, they were reportedly being kept apart between scenes to avoid arguments. Ooh, that must have been fun. When it was published in 1997, Tom Baker's autobiography was one of the raciest Doctor Who books to date. It includes an eye-popping story where he, let's say, enjoys the company of a lady who is wearing his Doctor Who scarf. As she threw herself wantonly on the wide Holiday Inn bed, she growled, "Come on, Doctor, let's travel through space." But one of Tom's predecessors was less public about his indiscretions. The second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, lived a double life for decades, fathering 3 children with his girlfriend, while publicly maintaining he still lived with his wife and their 3 children.
I first became aware of Patrick having 2 families. One day he gave me a lift home from rehearsals, and he deviated. He said, "I'm just going to pop in." And he went down this path, knocked at the door, and a lady came out and gave him a brown envelope. I said, "Who was that?" He said, "That's my wife." I went, "And your wife will Well, who's that? He said, oh, that's my girlfriend. I'm living with her. So that's the first time I realised, you've got two families. Because he was quite quiet. He wouldn't boast about it at all.
In fact, he kept all this so quiet that his own mother died believing he was still with his wife 24 years after he left her. If that sounds like Doctor Who could be a bit of a boys' club, you'd be right. The female performers often got a raw deal on and off camera. One companion you may not have heard of is April Walker. She won the part of Sarah Jane after a gruelling audition. But this is the Sarah Jane we know, played by actress Elizabeth Sladen. In an interview in 2020, April Walker spoke publicly for the first time about the shocking reason we never saw her in the role.
Contract came and I signed it and I got the scripts and I was measured for my costumes and all the rest. And then about 10 days or a fortnight later, I got a phone call from Barry Letts to say, April, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm afraid you're not going to be doing Doctor Who. And I said, why? He said, I'm afraid John says you're not right and he can't work with you in Doctor Who.
So April had been vetoed by John Pertwee and was then sworn to secrecy. She later had roles in shows including The Two Ronnies.
I'll have a martini, please.
Shaken or stirred?
Both, please.
And Fawlty Towers.
I think there's a letter for me.
What?
There's a letter for me there.
No, there isn't.
Yes. Jean Wilson.
But as April calmly and candidly reveals, there's another shocking secret behind that.
I did get paid because the contract was signed, but every time I worked for the BBC, the money that I earned from the other shows from the BBC were deducted from my Doctor Who money, which I suppose was fair.
Cheeky sods. When Sophie Aldred joined the show, she was aware of the baggage that came with it.
Before my Doctor Who experience, my main thought about Doctor Who girls, as they were called in those days, was that they screamed a lot. They wore quite revealing costumes for the dads and very high heels and ran around in quarries, which always seemed to me a silly idea.
And the producers knew exactly what they were doing.
They might have started to think that how can we attract more people to watch the show? And what might attract men to watch the show? Pretty girls with not much clothes on.
There was the character of Leela, played by Louise Jameson, who was very much for the dads. I think even my dad watched Doctor Who when Louise was on. She was wearing little more than a bit of chamois leather.
And even if they weren't being poured into skin-tight jumpsuits like Zoe in The Mind Robber, they were doled out the most menial tasks, like Polly in The Moon Base.
You found something.
Oh, Polly, I only wish I had. Why not make some coffee to keep them all happy while I think of something?
All right.
But perhaps the worst indignities were suffered by Nicola Bryant as Perry. And unbelievably, her wardrobe was only the start of it.
Shorts, bikini top, little shirt, and it's like she never got to put proper clothes on for what felt like the rest of that season. I was really stuck in some terribly 80s sexist crap, really, most of the time.
Producer John Nathan Turner intended for Perry to be a sex object right from her very first press photo call.
John Nathan Turner called me a few days beforehand and said, do you have any clingy tops? I said, well, not a lot, really. I've got like one disco boob tube, which was not really, because those were all the rage at the time. And he said, well, what's your clingiest thing? And I said, well, leotards from dance. And he said, well, bring some leotards. And do you have any short skirts? I was sort of running around one of the parks and being photographed barefoot in these outfits, running with an American flag.
The American flag was there because, to boost the show's profile in the US, Perry was the first American companion. But having successfully fooled the producers with her American accent at the audition, the very British Nicola had no idea that she would be forced to spend years living a lie.
I had to spend the whole of my 3 years in Doctor Who with an American accent. That's canteen and conventions. I just thought, this is what I have to do. I was worried that, like, aunts and uncles might ring up, like, BBC Breakfast and time and say, she's not American. That's my niece.
Here's Nicola cheerfully skirting the issue on Breakfast Time with Nick Ross.
Never done anything, not since I've left drama school.
It's astonishing. I'm intrigued at your accent, incidentally, which has a twang of American in it. Are you American?
Well, I have dual nationality. I've been sort of long-distance commuter for a long time.
To say it was tricky having to be American all the time is an understatement. But you handle stress a bit better, I think, when you're younger.
And to keep the boys interested, there was yet another fiction that she had to sustain.
I was pretending to be not only American, but also single. It was the producer, John Nathan Turner, who said, "Oh, I don't want you to be married." And, you know, these things that, as an adult now, I would go, "What?" I just was very, okay, this is what you have to do if you want to be an actor. I was always trying to redirect the questions that the press would ask me. Like, they'd say, you know, "What's your boyfriend's name?" And I'd sort of tweak it and say things like, "Well, if you're asking me if there's someone special in my life, yes, there is."
But another Doctor Who actress tackled the lad mag market on her own terms. Katie Manning played feisty companion Jo Grant from 1971 to 73. Thankfully, a series of more proactive and appropriately dressed companions even culminated in the show's first female Doctor in 2017, just 54 years after the show began. Though not without controversy.
It has alienated a large section of fans having a female, which is a bit sad. And it's really in the sort of age group, the sort of the 50, 60-year-old men who are particularly worried by it for some reason. I think they just see this as definitely should be a man's job.
I was thrilled when Jodie was cast. It was about time.
Coming up, extreme fans.
And a gentleman passed out at the bottom of the escalator from the sheer, I don't know what you call it, excitement of seeing me.
And the dark side of the show's most notorious producer.
He shouldn't have been having any kind of relationship with fans because that's not appropriate for the producer of a BBC programme.
It's 1983 and tensions are running high. The US Embassy in Beirut is bombed, Shergar is kidnapped, and in Wiltshire, a storm is brewing at the biggest Doctor Who convention ever.
Longleat 83 was such a huge event. It was the Woodstock of Doctor Who.
More like the Woodstock 99 of Doctor Who.
It was the first Doctor Who convention organised by the BBC. It wasn't an unmitigated disaster, it was just a bit of a disaster. Far more people turned up than the BBC were expecting, which is a good thing, except for the fact that there were massive queues.
The BBC had planned for 20,000 fans and more than 60,000 showed up to celebrate the show's 20th anniversary. But those who braved the queues could look at original props, watch old episodes and meet the cast and crew, including the show's producer, John Nathan Turner.
John Nathan Turner was a frustrated actor and a showman, and I think what he found in fandom was a ready audience who were going to applaud his every decision, he thought, at the beginning. And so it was a very addictive environment to go to conventions and to meet fans because they were saying what he wanted to hear.
Unlike his predecessors, Nathan Turner was proactive about engaging with the fans, but at Longleat he was in for a shock.
In 1983, at the big celebration of the show's 20th anniversary, John met a group of British fans at this huge convention.
Good morning. Good morning. You can do better than that. Good morning.
And they started to tell him in no uncertain terms where they thought he was going wrong. And John was incandescent. He thought, who are you to tell me, the producer of Doctor Who? And one of them said to him, well, you're the producer of Doctor Who now, but you're just the caretaker. It's the show we're bothered about, and we don't like what you're doing with it.
This might sound extreme, but Doctor Who fans have always been a breed apart.
It seems like no sooner there was a Doctor Who, there were Doctor Who fans.
There is a possessiveness with fans and Doctor Who, especially older fans like myself. There's a love-hate relationship going on because they tend to slag off the very thing that they love, and yet they keep buzzing around it. So they don't say, oh, that's no good anymore, and go off and do something else. They keep coming back to it, so they still love it.
A fan community can be a wonderful, wonderful thing. But so can a car, but you can still run somebody over with it.
Drama in the Doctor Who community was nothing new. 8 years earlier, Keith Miller, teenage president of the official Doctor Who fan club, visited the BBC to interview then-producer Philip Hinchcliffe. Talk soon turned to a rival organisation, and you'll never believe who was in charge.
I would think that a lot of the letters from people who know a lot about the programme are probably your members, I think, or else members of the other fan club. This Peter Capaldi and people like that.
Wait, what? The Peter Capaldi?
Back in the 70s, Peter Capaldi was involved in Doctor Who fandom and sort of mounted a kind of soft coup to get control.
Yes, decades before he played the Doctor, a teenage Peter Capaldi was such a huge fan, he not only set up his own fan club, but lobbied the production team to recognise his club as the official one. Everyone involved with Doctor Who quickly learns the same lesson. The fans know everything.
What is so extraordinary about all the fans, the wonderful fans, so enthusiastic about the shows, and they know everything about every story. Even if you freeze up when you're being asked a question, they will have the answer. And they say, oh, no, Margot, you're wrong. It was so-and-so. Oh, yes. You have to say, of course it was.
Sometimes this could be pretty useful. For example, if you've forgotten which way round the TARDIS is meant to spin.
There was no real establishment of actually which way the TARDIS spun. Clockwise, anti-clockwise. So we had to phone up the Doctor Who Appreciation Society. OK, what's the way? I did that once. Which way does the TARDIS spin?
Should you wish to meet a Doctor Who fan, there's no better place than at a Doctor Who convention.
The Doctor Who convention is quite mad. I mean, you've got people dressed as doctors and costumes and villains and Daleks of all shapes and sizes. And, of course, then you've got the celebrities, the actual actors, and usually some of the production company there as well.
There was one convention I remember particularly. We were going down this really long escalator, and a gentleman passed out at the bottom of the escalator from the sheer, I don't know what you call it, excitement of seeing me. And I was like, what? And then, of course, you've got this sense of slight impending doom because you've got to step over the body at the bottom because no one had moved him.
Some fans have also amassed impressive collections of original Doctor Who props, to the bafflement of the people who actually made them.
These things are made for one appearance on a screen. So when somebody says to me, hey, that's good, I'll give you £50,000 for that, you think, what? You know, this is ridiculous. This is stuff we used to throw away in the skip.
I think I paid £185 for a TARDIS roundel in 1996, which is like tuppence these days. They go for like £1,000, £2,000. I got the top part of a Dalek for roughly about £1,000 in 1997, 1998. I have a Cyberman from Earthshock. I think if I'm truthful, I probably have spent about £14,000. That's 1-4.
They've acquired this value. Hey, I own a small part of this particular programme, Doctor Who or otherwise. And it is a bit galling at times.
I have it insured, of course, on my household insurance. But it's under a special artefacts, as if it's a piece of art, you know, like an investment. You can't tell them, really, that you've got a Cyberman from Earthshock. They'll be like, excuse me?
In this hilarious on-the-nose sketch from 1999, David Walliams and Mark Gatiss play obsessive Doctor Who fans who kidnap Fifth Doctor Peter Davison.
Excuse my friend Mark Peter Davison. He's a little bit of a fan.
Enthusiast? In Modern Undead, Peter, how come the Brigadier...
Don't ask him about Doctor Who. Everybody asks him about Doctor Who. He's going to think you're a right nutcase. Ask him about his theatre work or about composing the theme to Button Moon.
You might think this is over the top, but in 2004, several reports claimed fans had emailed actual death threats to BBC staff because they were unhappy with the show's new logo. But in the 80s, there was no email or social media, so fans had to vent their frustration with the show via their own magazines.
Doctor Who fanzines in those days were a bit like Twitter 30 years early. And would you tell any television professional to lock themselves in a room with Twitter and try to please all of the voices?
And public enemy number one was John Nathan Turner.
I have this abiding memory of John getting the fanzines, locking himself in his office, and reading every word of them and sort of being more and more depressed. The only way to handle this is just not to look at these things, just to not read it, not read your own publicity, which is a lesson that John never learned.
By 1986, fans were even being invited on the telly to slag the programme off, as in this toe-curling encounter between members of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society and writers Pip and Jane Baker.
Well, I thought a lot of you Doctor Who fans like to have traditional stories.
It would be nice to have something totally different from the norm, though, just for a change. I mean, the last episode was admittedly much better than the previous 4, but I still felt that story was fairly boring.
You're getting a real hard time, Pip and Jen. I'm normally here to stick up for the viewers, but I feel a bit sorry for you.
This guy, by the way, is Chris Chibnall, who went on to have an amazing telly-career as the writer of Broadchurch. He was also the showrunner on Doctor Who from 2017 to 2022. The boot's on the other foot now, Chris. And it was gritted teeth all round when John Nathan Turner called into the show.
What would you like to ask the producer to do with the new series? Graham?
See, a lot more stories that begin with a beginning, have a middle and have an end.
Oh, can you promise that, John?
Well, I think that's what we've been giving the public in recent years, but we'll certainly take on board the points.
The problem with courting fandom is that it's all very well while it's going the way they want it to go, but as soon as you start to do things on the show that they don't approve of or they don't like, they're going to tell you, and they'll tell you in no uncertain terms. And that's what happened with John Nathan Turner. He didn't like it one bit.
But there was a darker side to John Nathan Turner's involvement with the fans. Richard Marson's 2013 biography alleged that the producer had pursued inappropriate relationships with young male fans.
John was a party animal, and I think particularly when he'd had a few drinks and when he was sort of in a social environment, he just didn't see the distinctions that should be there. So he would ask a fan, you know, would you like to come up to my room?
The book alleges that fans were sometimes plied with alcohol by Nathan Turner and his partner Gary Downey, who also worked on the show. Downey would scout conventions for doable barkers, their term for attractive male fans.
I've reflected about that so much because I think it's easy to say, you know, in the BBC bar with a few drinks and all the rest of it, was it just, you know, a bit of banter, a bit of this? But a lot of these people are quite vulnerable. You know, you're talking about teenagers, and it was absolutely not okay for him as a BBC producer to be, you know, trying it on with them.
A long-term smoker and heavy drinker, John Nathan Turner died aged 54 in 2002.
I didn't find any evidence that John Nathan Turner had sexual relations with anyone who was younger than now the legal age of consent, but he shouldn't have been having any kind of relationship with fans because that's not appropriate for the producer of a BBC programme. And he was using his status as a BBC producer. There was a power imbalance, and I think that he should have been aware of that and he shouldn't have behaved like that.
Coming up, chaos on the set of Doctor Who's first ever episode.
Everything that could have possibly gone wrong happened.
And the shocking story of how the BBC destroyed hundreds of episodes.
It's extraordinary where Doctor Who missing episodes crop up.
It's 1963 and the establishment is on the back foot. The Beatles are at #1 and starting a musical revolution. Martin Luther King has a dream and ITV is snapping at the BBC's heels. To shake things up, the BBC poached their rival's head of drama, Sidney Newman, and less than 6 months later, he created Doctor Who. The arrival of this flamboyant Canadian ruffled a lot of feathers, and the 28-year-old producer he hired for his new show was not your usual BBC type either.
Verity Lambert, she was the producer that Sidney appointed. Verity was one of the first ever female producers at the BBC and in British television, and the pressure on her shoulders must have been immense.
Completing our trio of telly trailblazers was 25-year-old director Waris Hussein.
I was the very first South Asian to be involved in directing in drama, not just Doctor Who, but anything. Verity Lambert, she being the first female, and me being first the South Asian. We formed a kind of partnership. And what with Sidney being a Canadian, I said, we're the Three Musketeers. We're fighting the system. And we were.
Waris is the man who said action on the very first episode of Doctor Who, twice.
Everything went wrong the day we were shooting. The doors would not open properly. The prop men were not coordinating. One of the actors got their heels stuck in the doorway as they tried to enter a room. Everything that could have possibly gone wrong happened.
Perhaps.
But it can't be. It was, you
This is the unbroadcast pilot episode of Doctor Who, complete with flapping and banging TARDIS doors. Sidney Newman was not impressed.
Sidney took us out to dinner and said, look, by all reason, I should be firing you. But I'm not going to do it, Waris. We're going to do it again. And I must say, the first episode, as we reshot it and is now available, turned out to be very, very good. We learned from our mistakes.
Second time lucky. And a few weeks later, Waris was back to direct his second story, where the Doctor joins Marco Polo on his epic journey across China. Look at the lavish sets and costumes. I bet you want to see it, right? Well, tough. You can't.
One of the real scandals of Doctor Who is that so much of it's missing. In the 1960s and 70s, there just wasn't the value attached to retaining TV shows. In those days, it was expensive to keep things, and unless there was going to be another use for it, the attitude was, well, let's get rid of it.
It was BBC policy to wipe programmes after broadcast, to reuse the tapes. Heartbreakingly, very little of Waris Hussein's TV work still exists, Doctor Who or otherwise.
It's absolutely tragic, because the subsequent dramas I directed, in those days there were serious plays called the Wednesday Play, they've all been wiped.
Many of Fraser Hines' Doctor Who episodes, where he starred alongside Patrick Troughton, no longer exist either.
BBC Two showed a story, one of Billy Hartnell's, one of mine, or Patrick, and I said, I hope they show some more. And somebody at BBC said, no, I think that's the only story you've got. They've been wiped. It's just been got rid of, which is a pity.
Ian Levine is a superfan who also helped the production team out when they had questions about Doctor Who history. He visited the BBC archives in 1977 and was horrified by what he saw.
We walked in there, and in the room full of film cans, there on the floor, there's a big pile of silver film cans taped up with white gaffer tape and a big red stamp on them saying withdrawn, deaccessioned and junked. The guy said that was his job tomorrow to put them into the skip.
Thanks to some quick thinking from Ian, the very first Dalek story was rescued from the skip. But 152 episodes was still officially missing, and with home video on the way, a worldwide hunt was on to get them back.
It's extraordinary where Doctor Who missing episodes crop up. Some are found in kind of deserted buildings the BBC may have used down the back of a filing cabinet. Some have been found in Africa or Hong Kong, places which bought Doctor Who and didn't, as they were supposed to do, destroy them when they'd shown them.
Over the decades, a steady stream of missing episodes have been returned to the BBC, and every discovery is a cause for celebration among fans.
I've been at the birth of both of my children, but I've never been more excited than I was when I found out that Web of Fear was back in the BBC archives. I mean, that's a slight exaggeration.
4 episodes of The Web of Fear, in which a gang of Yeti attacked the London Underground, were found in Nigeria in 2013. A 5th was also found, but mysteriously went missing again en route back to the BBC. In the same batch was The Enemy of the World, where Patrick Troughton's Doctor is mistaken for his Mexican doppelganger, complete with outrageous accent.
My dear Federer, you don't suppose that I intend to make your swindling public, huh?
This spectacular story, Tomb of the Cybermen, was found in its entirety in Hong Kong in 1991. This was such a significant discovery that when it was released on video the following year, it even outsold Silence of the Lambs. There are 97 episodes still officially missing, and there's a whole cottage industry of people looking for them. One of them is former companion Mark Strickson, who quit acting in the 90s to become a documentary producer.
I was making a film about chimps in Sierra Leone just after the Civil War, and we were one of the first crews in. And I realised that there was a television station. And so I thought, I'll go and search for the missing Doctor Who tapes. It was quite exciting. They definitely had some Doctor Who tapes, but they didn't have the missing tapes. But I wonder if they were there, somewhere in those thousands of tapes they had stored.
Rumours persist that there are 2 episodes being held by private collectors who are refusing to return them to the BBC. But hope remains that there are more discoveries to be made.
Those are completed shows that have disappeared, and I believe they still exist somewhere in the world.
I still entertain the idea that there are missing episodes out there. I mean, I'd love it to find them all.
Top of everybody's wish list is episode 4 of The 10th Planet, the Doctor's first battle with the Cybermen. But thanks to Blue Peter, who borrowed the episode to use a clip before it was wiped, we can still enjoy this, the show's most gobsmacking cliffhanger to date. At the end of the episode, the Doctor collapses and regenerates into another actor for the very first time.
I think the genius of the change of lead actors in Doctor Who is that rather than just do it like James Bond, where you just change the actor and, you know, the audience goes along with it, it became part of the narrative. You actually saw the transformation happen. And that was, A, very thrilling, but B, it also kind of gave the show an endless lease of new life.
William Hartnell left the show due to failing health. But recasting the lead was a massive gamble that could have backfired. The pressure on Hartnell's replacement, Patrick Troughton, was immense.
Peter Davison and Colin Baker, they all say if it wasn't for Patrick, we wouldn't be here now, because he was the first regeneration. And if it hadn't worked, the BBC would have pulled the plug and that been it.
But as we can reveal, Troughton had some shocking ideas for how he'd play the part, as he later outlined in this astonishing Pebble Mill interview.
My original idea was to black up and wear a big turban and brass earrings and a big grey beard and do it like the Arabian Nights.
Thankfully, the BBC ignored him, to the relief of Doctor Who cosplayers everywhere. And Patrick wasn't the only one with some dubious ideas about how to play the role. Brian Blessed has claimed in multiple interviews that he was also offered the role of the second Doctor. I said, well, his name is Who, which is not an English name at all, it's from the Far East, so I'd like to play him like Charlie Chan and make him Chinese. Well, the offer disappeared very quickly after that, as they obviously thought they were dealing with a total maniac. Having wisely avoided a blackface and yellowface second Doctor, the BBC were on to a winner. Thanks to regeneration, the show could last forever. At least that was the theory. Coming up, Doctor Who faces the decade from hell.
First call I got was from the press. How did I feel about the death of Doctor Who?
And we reveal the worst charity single of all time.
Who have we got? We've got some of Bucks Fizz.
It's 1985. Live Aid takes place at Wembley. The wreckage of the Titanic is found. And Doctor Who star Nicola Bryant is about to receive a bombshell phone call from a journalist.
I literally just walked into my little flat and the phone was ringing. First call I got was from the press. How did I feel about the death of Doctor Who? I thought they meant something had happened to Colin. So I immediately hung up and was really distressed. And then the phone went again, and it was my agent. And I was just sobbing on the phone to him saying, Colin's dead, I don't know what happened, I mean, poor Marion. And I was just in a terrible way. And he said, no, Colin's fine, the show's dead.
Doctor Who had been cancelled, and one man was responsible for the decision to pull the plug.
Michael Grade.
Michael Grade.
Michael Grade.
Michael Grade wasn't happy with the show. I don't think the viewing figures were as good as he probably wanted. And so, very sadly, it did get cancelled.
Michael Grade was another BBC outsider, having spent 8 years at LWT and 2 in Hollywood. Rumours swirled as to why he cancelled the show, including that he wanted to free up money for the new soap EastEnders. But maybe it was all much simpler than that, as he explained with brutally flippant clarity in this Room 101 appearance.
So why did you cancel the show?
I thought it was rubbish. I thought it was pathetic. I mean, I'd seen Star Wars, and I'd seen Close Encounters and E.T., and then I had to watch these cardboard things probably clonking across the floor, trying to scare kids. You know, you just sit and laugh at it.
The fans were shell-shocked.
I was devastated. I'm not ashamed to go, it was awful and probably the worst moment of my life. And if anybody watching that thinks I'm sad, that's fine.
John Nathan Turner's relationship with the fan community had already soured. Now he was at war with his bosses as well, but he was determined not to let the show slip away quietly.
John Nathan Turner, who had very good contacts in Fleet Street because of all his publicity talent, he just was picking up the phone and he was pulling the strings and keeping these stories going. Save Doctor Who. You know, he did whatever he could
John Nathan Turner stirred up a tabloid storm, and his primary accomplice was Ian Levine, who was pictured in the papers smashing his TV in disgust at the BBC's decision. Ian was also a legendary DJ and music producer and went on to work with Take That. His two worlds were about to collide in spectacular fashion.
Doctor in Distress is the charity single that they made to try and save Doctor Who.
I mean, it's an example of how Doctor Who fans react to things, to be fair, is somebody goes, you know that dreadful famine in Ethiopia? You know how all those people got together and did a record to raise money for that marvellous cause that touched us all? My favourite programme's been cancelled. Should we do the same, because it's kind of the equivalent?
And here it is. Just 3 months after Band-Aid's Do They Know It's Christmas, this absolute banger features show stars Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant alongside some other people.
Who did they get for Band-Aid? They got Bono and George Michael and Sting. Who have we got? We've got some of Bucks Fizz and a man from the Moody Blues. Brilliant.
Producer Ian Levine has mixed feelings about it now.
It was the worst charity record of all time. I hate everything to do with it. I cringe with embarrassment. It's a stain on my career.
But as well as the slightly motley array of singers, there was some surprisingly high-caliber talent behind the scenes.
The music was made by Hans Zimmer. You talk about me being embarrassed. Hans Zimmer did The Lion King, Gladiator, and all the Batman films. I mean, how many films Hans Zimmer won awards for? He's the greatest film composer of all time.
Needless to say, the record did not trouble the charts.
You don't hear that record played on the radio so often these days, do you? It doesn't come around on those gold stations.
You know, I won a Brit Award for Best Single in 1992, and I had to suffer Doctor in Distress on my CV.
And even if the record was a flop, BBC bosses were still rattled by the backlash.
The Earthman, known as Michael Grade, has achieved a mighty victory for our cause.
That's right, you've got a serious PR crisis on your hands when there's a Cyberman wisecracking about the controller of BBC One on Wogan.
And then the BBC has to do this frantic backpedaling where it says, actually, no, the programme's just being rested. It's only going to be rested.
So 18 months later, the show was back. But the BBC had another nasty surprise in store.
At the end of that series, John was told, you've got to sack your leading man. You've got to get rid of Colin Baker.
Colin Baker was completely blindsided, as he later admitted in this 1994 documentary.
He rang me up and said, I've got some good news and some bad news. I said, oh, well, let's have the good news first. He said, well, the series is going again next year. I said, oh, great. Bad news? I've been asked to recast the part of the Doctor, which was somewhat of a blow.
Understandably upset about being fired, Colin Baker refused to participate in filming the traditional regeneration sequence, resulting in this rather business-like changeover. Which, as this fascinating behind-the-scenes footage shows, was achieved via the high-tech solution of putting his successor, Sylvester McCoy, in a blonde curly wig. Doctor Who had survived another year, but the end was in sight. Joining the show for its final years was script editor Andrew Cartmel.
Doctor Who was reviled at the BBC, and I'm not exaggerating. People just hated it, and they wanted to kill it. And I always think of that Monty Python skit about somebody comes back and says, where have you been? Oh, I've been burying the cat for 3 hours. It kept struggling. And that was what was happening with Doctor Who. They kept trying to bury it, but it kept struggling, and it wouldn't die.
The BBC finally made their move in 1989. Kind of.
There was never an official announcement that Doctor Who was being cancelled for good. And I think the reason for that was they didn't want a repeat of all the protests and the fuss.
People often ask me, when did you find out the show was cancelled? The answer is never. Because it's like if you ghost your girlfriend, you don't tell her that you split up. You just never call her back and take her calls. And it was like that.
The BBC decided to kill the show sneakily and slowly via the dark art of scheduling.
They scheduled it to death. They put it opposite Coronation Street. It was doing okay. I mean, opposite Coronation Street, to get 4 or 5 million wasn't bad. But, you could easily use that as a stick to beat the show and say, oh, it's only getting 4 million, whereas 4 years ago it was getting 8 million. Well, you moved it away from that slot. Of course it's only getting 4 million. It's up against Coronation Street.
I picked up the phone and it was Sylvester.
And he said, Sophie, he said, are you sitting down? And I sat down on the desk. I said, I am now. And he said, Doctor Who's not coming back next year. And it was really sad.
But the story doesn't end there, of course. In 2005, the show made a glorious return, and this time it was superfans like Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat, David Tennant, and Peter Capaldi calling the shots. And with the 14th Doctor about to make his debut, it's been a bumpy ride through time and space for programme makers and fans alike.
I think the crucial thing about Doctor Who is you've got a format that can last forever.
I'm grateful for the fact that I'm a part of history, but I still regard it all as a bit of a strange experience.
For 6 decades, Doctor Who has entertained us, thrilled us, and terrified us, and has survived against all the odds.
Doctor Who has taken me to New Zealand, Australia, America, and Cleethorpes. So it's been really great.
It was a complete and utter shock and delight.
The show has faced scandal both inside and outside the TARDIS, and with each regeneration, there's a new universe of secrets to discover.
It created this family of people who loved the show, and that has just gone on and on and on. It's quite amazing.
There were some terrible things going on, and yet it was also a fabulous time.
Revealing how the royal family celebrate the festive season. Sandringham, The King at Christmas, is brand new next Saturday at 8:25. And remembering one of London's most devastating disasters, the year the Thames flooded, is brand new at 9 tomorrow. Next tonight, the most shocking moments of the 80s.